Welcome to World Rare Coin Vault, where history, craftsmanship, and the fascinating world of coin collecting come together. If you're passionate about British coins, hidden treasures, and learning what makes certain pieces stand out to collectors, you've come to the right place. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you never miss our latest discoveries, expert insights, and collector guides in the world of numismatics. Imagine finding an old British halfpenny tucked away in a forgotten drawer, an inherited coin album, or even a family keepsake. At first glance, it might seem like nothing more than an ordinary bronze coin from decades ago. But what if that small coin carried a remarkable story spanning royal reigns, world events, and generations of British history? Could one of these humble half-pennies be more desirable to collectors than you ever imagined? In today's documentary, we're exploring 4 fascinating British half-penny coins struck in 1927, 1943, 1952, and 1967. Together, these coins represent 3 different monarchs and nearly half a century of British history. We'll examine how their designs evolved, why each year is historically significant, what collectors look for today, the differences between ordinary circulation coins and scarce varieties, and why condition plays such an important role in determining collector interest. Although millions of half-pennies were produced during the 20th century, not every surviving example is the same. Small differences in preservation, striking quality, and documented varieties can make one coin much more desirable than another. Throughout this journey, we'll separate verified numismatic facts from common myths and explain why experienced collectors always rely on careful research rather than sensational claims. Let's begin our journey with the oldest coin in today's collection, the 1927 British halfpenny, and discover why it remains an important piece of Britain's numismatic history nearly a century after it first entered circulation. Well, our story begins in 1927. During the reign of King George V, a monarch whose image appeared on British coinage for more than a quarter of a century. By this time, Britain had entered a period of rebuilding after the First World War. Industry was changing, technology was advancing, and everyday commerce relied heavily on low-denomination coins like the halfpenny. Although its face value was modest, this small bronze coin played a vital role in daily life, making even the smallest purchases possible. The 1927 halfpenny was struck in bronze, an alloy made primarily of copper, with smaller amounts of tin and zinc. It weighs approximately 5.67 grams, measures about 25.5 millimeters in diameter, and features a plain edge. These specifications remain consistent across many halfpenny issues of the era, giving the denomination a familiar appearance that the public easily recognized. On the obverse, your coin displays a left-facing portrait of King George V. The portrait was designed by Sir Bertram Mackennal, one of Britain's most respected sculptors. Around the king's portrait is a Latin inscription that translates to George V, by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, Defender of the Faith, Emperor of India. This inscription reflected Britain's status as a global empire during the early 20th century. Turning the coin over reveals one of the most recognizable designs in British numismatic history. Britannia sits confidently facing right, holding a trident that symbolizes Britain's naval strength, while her shield bearing the Union flag represents national unity and resilience. A lighthouse appears in the background, symbolizing guidance and maritime security, while a ship sailing on the horizon reflects Britain's long-standing relationship with global trade and the sea. This iconic reverse was created by Leonard Charles Wyon and remained a defining feature of British bronze coinage for many decades. Looking closely at the uploaded image, the major design elements are clearly visible. The portrait of King George V remains well defined, and Britannia's seated figure, trident, shield, lighthouse, and the date 1927 can all be identified. However, the image resolution does not allow confirmation of finer details, such as surface preservation, dye state, or possible minor varieties. Those characteristics require close examination under magnification or high-resolution photography. One question many collectors ask is whether every 1927 halfpenny is rare. The answer is no. While the coin is an important historical issue, most circulated examples are relatively accessible to collectors. What truly influences value is the coin's condition. A heavily worn example may appeal primarily as a historical keepsake, while a sharply struck coin with original mint luster and minimal marks is significantly more desirable. Certified mint state examples are much scarcer because relatively few survive decades of circulation without wear. Another point worth mentioning is that collectors are always interested in documented varieties and genuine minting errors. However, no major widely recognized error defines the standard 1927 half-penny series. Any unusual-looking coin should be carefully authenticated before assumptions are made, as post-mint damage is often mistaken for a valuable mint error. Have you ever inherited an old coin and wondered whether it spent decades quietly waiting to be rediscovered? That's one of the greatest joys of coin collecting. Every scratch, every worn edge, and every carefully preserved detail tells part of a much larger story. The next chapter in our journey brings us to the 1967, a year that marked the closing chapter of one of Britain's oldest circulating denominations. The 1967 halfpenny was issued during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II and would become the last halfpenny produced for general circulation before Britain adopted decimal currency in 1971. Although the denomination officially remained legal tender for a short time, the familiar pre-decimal halfpenny soon disappeared from everyday use, ending a tradition that had served the British public for centuries. The 1967 halfpenny was struck in bronze, consisting primarily of copper, with smaller amounts of tin and zinc. It weighs approximately 5.67 grams, measures around 25.5 millimeters in diameter, and has a plain edge. While its physical specifications closely matched earlier halfpennies, the portrait on the obverse reflected a new generation and a modern Britain entering a period of significant social and economic change. The obverse features a youthful portrait of Queen Elizabeth II designed by Mary Gillick. This elegant portrait, showing the Queen wearing a laurel wreath rather than a crown, is considered one of the most graceful portraits ever used on British coinage. Surrounding the portrait is a traditional Latin inscription identifying Elizabeth II as Queen and Defender of the Faith. The reverse continues a long-established Britannia design created by Leonard Charles Wyon. Britannia sits confidently with her trident and shield while a lighthouse stands behind her and a ship sails across the distant sea. It is remarkable that this iconic design remained virtually unchanged to the reigns of three monarchs represented in today's video. That continuity gives a halfpenny series a timeless appearance and makes it especially rewarding for collectors who enjoy building complete date sets. Looking at your uploaded photograph, the date 1967 is clearly visible, along with Queen Elizabeth II portrait and Britannia's classic reverse design. The major details can easily be identified, but the image does not provide sufficient resolution to determine whether the coin has been cleaned, whether original mint luster remains, or whether any minor dye varieties are present. Those factors require close examination with proper lighting and magnification. Because 1967 was the final circulating halfpenny issue, many people assume every example is rare. In reality, a large number were produced before decimalization, meaning circulated examples remain relatively common today. However, pristine uncirculated pieces, particularly those with full original red bronze surfaces and strong eye appeal, are much more difficult to locate and are naturally more desirable to advanced collectors. As with every coin we've discussed today, condition is one of the most important factors influencing collector demand. A worn example that spent years in circulation tells a fascinating historical story, while a carefully preserved mint state example offers a glimpse of how the coin appeared when it first left the Royal Mint. Two coins bearing the same date can differ dramatically in value because of their grade, originality, strike quality, and overall eye appeal. Collectors should also be cautious when evaluating unusual-looking coins. Genuine mint errors are documented within British coinage, but they are uncommon. Scratches, dents, corrosion, environmental damage, and cleaning marks are frequently mistaken for mint errors by inexperienced collectors. Before paying a premium or attempting to sell an unusual coin, professional authentication and grading from a respected third-party service can provide confidence for both buyers and sellers. The next chapter in our journey brings us to the 1943 British halfpenny, a coin that circulated during one of the most significant periods in modern history. In 1943, Britain was fully engaged in the Second World War. Resources were tightly controlled, Families lived under rationing, and millions of people contributed to the war effort in countless ways. Even a small bronze halfpenny became an essential part of everyday commerce, changing hands in shops, markets, and railway stations across the country. Despite the wartime pressures, the Royal Mint continued producing bronze halfpennies because they remained necessary for daily transactions. The coin retained its traditional bronze composition, consisting primarily of copper, along with smaller amounts of tin and zinc. It weighs approximately 5.67 grams, measures about 25.5 millimeters in diameter, and features a plain edge. Although these specifications remain largely unchanged, every 1943 halfpenny carries the historical significance of being struck during a time when Britain's economy and industry were focused on supporting the war. The obverse features a left-facing portrait of King George VI, designed by Thomas Humphrey Paget. Around the portrait appears a familiar Latin legend identifying George VI as king and defender of the faith. Compared with the portrait of his father, King George V, this design presents a younger monarch whose reign became closely associated with Britain's determination and resilience throughout World War II. On the reverse, Britannia once again takes her place as the enduring symbol of the nation. Holding her trident and resting beside the Union's shield, she represents strength, stability, and Britain's enduring connection to the sea. The lighthouse in the distance continues to symbolize guidance and security, while the ship on the horizon reflects Britain's maritime heritage and its dependence on naval power during wartime. Examining your uploaded photograph, the major design elements remain clearly identifiable. King George VI's portrait is well defined, and Britannia's seated figure, trident, shield, lighthouse, and the date 1943 are all visible. However, the photograph does not provide enough magnification to determine the exact grade, identify possible dye varieties, or verify subtle minting characteristics. Those details require an in-hand inspection or professional high-resolution imaging. Many collectors wonder whether a wartime date automatically makes a coin rare. The answer is not necessarily. The 1943 halfpenny was produced in substantial numbers for circulation, so ordinary circulated examples are generally obtainable. However, truly exceptional coins are another matter. Examples that retain original mint luster, strong strike quality, attractive surfaces, and minimal contact marks are considerably scarcer because very few escape decades of everyday use. Collectors should also remember that unusual-looking coins deserve careful examination before being labeled as valuable errors. Genuine mint errors such as off-center strikes or major planchet errors are documented across many coin series, but are uncommon. Damage caused after the coin left the mint, including scratches, corrosion, bending, or environmental exposure, is far more common and usually does not add collector value. This is why authentication by a reputable third-party grading service can be invaluable when a coin appears unusual. Another fascinating aspect of the 1943 halfpenny is the story it represents rather than its monetary value alone. Every surviving example may have passed to the hands of shopkeepers, factory workers, soldiers on leave, or families managing daily life during one of history's most difficult periods. That historical connection is often just as meaningful to collectors as rarity itself. If someone handed you a handful of old British coins today, would you recognize the one that quietly witnessed the years of World War II? Sometimes the greatest treasure is not the rarest coin, but the story that is carried through generations. Our final coin brings us to 1952, a year that marked the closing chapter of one of Britain's oldest circulating denominations. The 1952 halfpenny was issued during the final year of King George VI's reign. On February 6, 1952, the king passed away, and his daughter, Princess Elizabeth, immediately became Queen Elizabeth II. Because of this remarkable transition, every 1952 halfpenny represents the closing chapter of one royal era and the beginning of another. It is a coin closely connected with one of the most significant moments in British history. Like its predecessor, the 1952 halfpenny was struck in bronze, composed primarily of copper, with smaller amounts of tin and zinc. It weighs approximately 5.67 grams, has a diameter of about 25.5 millimeters, and features a plain edge. Although these technical specifications remain unchanged, the historical context behind the coin makes it especially interesting to collectors. The obverse displays a portrait of King George VI, created by Thomas Humphrey Paget. By 1952, this familiar portrait had appeared on British coinage for many years and had become a symbol of stability through the difficult years of war and post-war recovery. Surrounding the portrait is a traditional Latin inscription identifying George VI as king and defender of the faith. On the reverse, Britannia continues to dominate the design. Seated confidently with her trident and Union shield, she symbolizes Britain's enduring strength and maritime tradition. Behind her, the lighthouse represents guidance and security, while the ship on the horizon reminds collectors of Britain's long-standing relationship with the sea. These classic design elements have become instantly recognizable to generations of people using halfpennies in everyday life. Looking at your uploaded photograph, the main features of the 1952 coin can be clearly identified. The portrait of King George VI is visible, as are Britannia, the trident, shield, lighthouse, and the date. However, the image resolution is not sufficient to determine whether the coin retains original mint luster, has evidence of cleaning, or shows any subtle dye characteristics. These details require close physical examination under proper lighting. One of the most common misconceptions is that every 1952 halfpenny is rare because it was issued during a royal transition. In reality, many examples were produced for circulation, and ordinary circulated pieces are generally available to collectors. What separates one coin from another is its state of preservation. Coins graded extremely fine, about uncirculated, or mint state are significantly more desirable because so few survive decades of handling without noticeable wear. Another important point for collectors is the existence of proof coins. Proof versions of certain British coins from this era were specially struck for collectors using polished dies and carefully prepared planchets. These pieces display exceptional detail and mirror-like surfaces, making them very different from standard circulation coins. However, proof coins are distinct collector issues and should not be confused with ordinary business strikes. Whenever evaluating a 1952 halfpenny, avoid cleaning it, even if it appears dark or tarnished. Many beginners believe that making a coin shiny increases its value, but experienced collectors know the opposite is often true. Cleaning can permanently damage the original surface, create fine hairline scratches, and reduce collector appeal. The safest approach is to handle the coin only by its edges and store it in a protective holder away from moisture and extreme temperatures. Imagine discovering a 1952 halfpenny that has remained untouched since the year Queen Elizabeth II ascended the throne. Would you preserve it as a family heirloom, or would you have it professionally authenticated to learn more about its condition and collector value? One of the greatest lessons these four halfpennies teach us is that history cannot always be measured by face value. The 1927 issue reflects Britain's interwar years under King George V. The 1943 coin survived the challenges of World War II under King George VI. The 1952 halfpenny witnessed a transition from one monarch to another, and the 1967 issue became the final circulating chapter of a denomination that had served Britain for generations. So, which of these four halfpennies surprised you the most? Do you already own one of them, or will today's journey inspire you to begin searching through old collections and family keepsakes? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this exploration of British halfpenny history, please give this video a like, share it with fellow coin enthusiasts, and subscribe to World Rare Coin Vault for more accurate, fact-based numismatic stories, collector guides, and fascinating discoveries from the world of coins. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next adventure.